Margaret stood on the front porch with two heavy canvas suitcases by her side, hands trembling not from age, but from what had just happened. Behind her, the door clicked shut. Not slammed, not locked, just closed. Amanda hadn't yelled, hadn't cried. She'd simply asked her to leave. "We can't afford to keep you anymore," she had said, arms crossed, voice flat. Margaret didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. The silence between mother and daughter had grown too wide, too cold. With a tight chest and a stinging itchy throat, she stepped away. No one offered a hug, not even goodbye. The bags had no wheels, only frayed handles and old zippers that barely closed. Her joints ached, especially her fingers, stiff and twisted from years of cleaning houses and scrubbing floors for strangers. She wore a faded cardigan and dignity that wavered but didn't break. On the sidewalk, she stopped to catch her breath. A baby cried behind the door she'd just exited, but Amanda didn't come out. Her husband Daniel hadn't even looked her in the eyes. Margaret turned the corner with slow, dragging steps. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay. That much was clear. She walked for blocks without stopping. The city moved around her as if she were invisible. Taxis honked, dogs barked, teenagers laughed too loudly. She passed cafes and shops, but her feet ached more than her pride. When she finally sat on a bench, she exhaled like she hadn't in years. Then, quietly, she cried. Not from anger, not from rejection, but from something deeper, something like erasure. She had raised Amanda alone, skipped meals to feed her, sold her wedding ring to pay for textbooks. Now she was discarded like a coat that no longer fit. And Amanda never looked back. What Amanda didn't know, what no one knew, was that Margaret hadn't been fired. She'd retired by choice. Her hands could no longer fold laundry without feeling like her bones would crack. Years earlier, she'd inherited a barren piece of land outside the city. People said it was worthless. No water, no roads. She kept paying taxes anyway, pawning jewelry and sacrificing meals to do so. Weeks before Amanda asked her to leave, a railway company had made her an offer. The land sat in the path of a new expansion line. Margaret agreed under one condition. Silence. The payment? $1.7 million. She didn't go to a hotel that night. She went to a shelter in the neighborhood of Glenwood. Not because she had to, but because she remembered what it felt like to have nothing. The shelter was filled with stories like hers, forgotten women with folded hands and fading voices. There, she was just another face, another bed, another plate. But something stirred in her. An old warmth, maybe, or a spark. While others slept, Margaret lay awake, staring at the ceiling, planning something. She didn't want pity. She didn't want applause. She wanted to build a place where no one was disposable. She found the property the following week, an abandoned potting shed surrounded by weeds and silence. The windows were broken, the roof sagging, the air thick with mildew and memories. No one wanted it. Margaret paid cash. She bought it through a discreet foundation, using a name no one would recognize. The contractors she hired were from out of town. She told no one her story, no news articles, no social media posts, just work. Day by day, she turned the ruin into something new. Warm rooms, solar-powered kitchens, beds with clean sheets. The sign over the entrance would read, Haven Grace. A month later, a tired young woman walked the streets with a baby strapped to her chest and a plastic bag filled with diapers. Amanda. Her husband had left without a word. Rent had doubled. Her friends disappeared. Her phone calls went unanswered. She was sleep-deprived, scared, and alone. The baby, Ethan, cried for hours some nights, inconsolable. Doctors suspected autism. Amanda didn't know what that meant yet, only that it was another weight on her back. As she wandered aimlessly through a cold drizzle, she saw the words carved into the wall of a modest building. Here, everyone has a place. She stepped inside without knowing why. Warm light greeted her, along with the scent of bread and something comforting. Children played quietly in the back. An old man dozed in a rocking chair. a young volunteer handed her a blanket and a smile. Then, from behind the kitchen counter, a familiar figure emerged. Margaret, her mother. But Amanda didn't recognize her right away. Margaret wore a plain apron, her hair in a loose bun, her posture calm. She didn't say her name, didn't ask questions. She just placed a steaming bowl of soup in front of Amanda and said gently, "It's cold. Stay." Amanda blinked, confused. The woman looked familiar yet distant, like a dream from childhood. She didn't speak, didn't ask. Just stared at the soup, then at the woman. And slowly, silently, she began to cry. Ethan shifted against her chest, letting out a soft sound. Margaret didn't move. She didn't reach to hug her. She didn't cry. She simply turned back to the kitchen, leaving Amanda with the warmth of soup and the confusion of memory. Amanda had no idea what to do next. All she knew was that, for the first time in weeks, she wasn't cold. Not entirely. That night, Amanda and Ethan slept in a small upstairs room. 2 clean beds, a hand-woven quilt, a crib beside the window. Amanda lay awake, unable to close her eyes. Her mind echoed with scenes from childhood. Margaret ironing school uniforms, cooking rice pudding, laughing softly. And then, the last image. Her mother walking away with 2 heavy suitcases, silent, broken. Shame gripped her throat. She had told herself it was the only choice. But now, it felt like abandonment in reverse. She hadn't pushed her mother out because she had no room. She had pushed her out because she hadn't understood love. Over the next few days, Amanda kept to herself. She helped clean trays in the kitchen, swept floors, changed sheets. She didn't speak much, neither did Margaret, but the rhythm of Haven Grace was calming. No shouting, no tension. The volunteers moved with quiet purpose. Everyone helped, but no one demanded. For the first time in her life, Amanda began to feel what community really meant. Ethan played in the sunlit garden with other children. His laughter, rare, high-pitched, beautiful, brought tears to her eyes. Margaret would pass by sometimes, offering a nod, a smile, but never a confrontation. Not yet. On the 5th evening, Amanda found herself washing vegetables in the kitchen when Margaret appeared beside her with a basket. Carrots, onions, tomatoes. She didn't say much, just pointed to the cutting board and said, "We're making lentils tonight. You still like those?" Amanda hesitated, then nodded. The knives moved slowly. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't cruel. It was shared. As they chopped side by side, something inside Amanda began to unravel. Not in pain, but in release. Her mother hadn't come to scold her. She had come to feed her, to offer what she always had. Quiet, unshakable care. Later that night, Margaret showed Amanda a smaller room at the back of the building. A twin bed, a baby cot, a small lamp on a wooden table. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said. "Not because you're my daughter, but because no one should sleep on the street if it can be avoided." Amanda sat on the bed, overwhelmed. Her throat tightened. "I failed you," she whispered. Margaret didn't deny it, didn't soften it. She simply sat beside her and took her hand. "And I didn't know how to tell you I was tired," she said. A long pause hung between them, not the cold silence of departure, but a healing one. Amanda finally asked, "Why didn't you tell me about the land? The money?" Margaret took a breath. "Because I needed to know who would be with me, if I had nothing to give. Not even a story. Just my presence." Amanda looked down at her hands, scraped, calloused from pushing strollers and carrying bags. "Was it worth it?" she asked. Margaret smiled faintly. "Look at us," she said. "We're cooking lentils together." For the first time in months, Amanda smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was real. Days turned into weeks. Amanda started organizing literacy classes for the women in the shelter. She redesigned the garden with donated books and a reading nook. Without realizing, she became part of the very foundation her mother had built. Margaret watched from a distance, seeing her daughter transform, not into the girl she once knew, but into the woman she always hoped she'd become. Amanda no longer measured stability by comfort. She measured it by action, by usefulness, by kindness. The baby, Ethan, thrived under this rhythm. And Margaret? She began preparing for something she had waited years to do. Let go. One morning, while cleaning out an old storage closet, Amanda found a rusted wooden box with a fragile lock. "Can I open this?" she asked. Margaret nodded. Inside, Amanda discovered yellowed letters, faded photographs, and one sealed envelope, marked, "To my daughter, if she ever returns." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter inside read, "If you're reading this, something in you still beats strong. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to remember. Love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits in silence, hoping to bloom when the seed..." She didn't understand how, but something in this place seemed to soften the world around him. And her. The next morning, Amanda helped organize a delivery of winter coats and hygiene kits. While sorting sizes, she met a teenage mother named Lily who had walked 30 blocks with a diaper bag and no socks. Her baby was sick. Amanda gave her a space to sleep and later brought her tea. It was strange, offering comfort when she'd barely learned how to receive it. Margaret watched from the hallway but said nothing. Amanda wasn't the same woman who arrived crying with a bottle of formula. She moved with purpose now. Her hands no longer trembled from fear, only from fatigue. Margaret spent more time outside. The shelter now, visiting hospitals, community centers, and local food banks. But she always returned before sundown. Amanda often wondered if her mother had forgiven her or simply moved past it. The words were never said. Still, their silences were softer now, their rhythms synchronized. On rainy afternoons, they played dominoes in the common room. At dinner, they sometimes shared quiet laughs. Ethan had even taken to calling Margaret Mimi. Amanda smiled the first time she heard it. Margaret didn't react, but later that night, Amanda saw her alone, touching her face with trembling fingers. One Thursday morning, Margaret handed Amanda a manila folder. "These are the documents for Haven Grace," she said. Amanda's heart skipped. "Why me?" Margaret's answer was simple. "Because this place was never mine. It was always meant for those who needed it. And now, they need you." Amanda didn't speak. She just nodded, clutching the folder like it weighed 100 pounds. That night, she couldn't sleep. Not out of fear, but out of a strange, budding hope. She lay beside Ethan and thought of how many nights her mother must have done the same, watching over her, never asking for anything. But healing isn't linear, and neither is guilt. A week later, Amanda received a call from the hospital. Ethan had suffered a mild seizure. The world she had begun to rebuild cracked instantly. She rushed to the ER barefoot, heart pounding. Margaret met her there, calm as ever, holding a blanket and a thermos of warm milk. "He's stable," the nurse said, "but you'll need to monitor him closely." Amanda collapsed in the waiting room chair, sobbing silently. Margaret sat beside her. She didn't hug her. She didn't whisper reassurances. She simply placed her hand over Amanda's and stayed there. Ethan recovered quickly, but Amanda did not. Doubt began to fester again, about herself, her choices, her worth. She questioned whether she was capable of caring for a child with special needs, of running a community shelter, of being the daughter her mother deserved. At dinner, she snapped at a volunteer. Later, she cried in the pantry, ashamed. Margaret found her there, gently wiping flour off a canned bean label. "You don't have to prove anything," she said. "You're already enough. You're here." Amanda nodded but didn't respond. The ache inside her wasn't ready to speak, but it was listening now. Weeks passed. Winter came. Haven Grace filled with people needing warmth, food, and a kind word. Amanda organized a clothing drive and set up an after-school reading hour for local kids. Ethan giggled as he helped hand out snacks, even if he preferred to sit quietly with puzzles. Amanda learned the rhythm of his needs, the quiet cues, the overstimulated moments. She became fluent in his silences. Margaret watched with pride, though her body had begun to slow. She napped more, walked less. But she never stopped showing up. Her presence was stitched into the very walls of the home they built. On Christmas Eve, the shelter held a community dinner. Tables were filled with roasted vegetables, lentil stew, warm bread, and laughter. Amanda stood beside Margaret in the kitchen, hands dusted with flour. "Do you remember our Christmases?" Amanda asked. Margaret smiled. "We didn't have much, but we always had food." Amanda nodded. "And each other," she added, voice low. Margaret said nothing, but reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Amanda's ear. It was the first time she had touched her that way in years. In that one gesture, everything unspoken was acknowledged. Forgiveness doesn't always need words. That night, after the dishes were cleaned and the guests had gone to sleep, Amanda went to check on her mother. The room was empty, her bed undisturbed. Panic rose in Amanda's chest. She searched the halls, the pantry, the office. Nothing. Finally, she stepped outside into the garden, where a thin layer of snow covered the ground. There, beneath the old oak tree. Margaret sat in silence, wrapped in a shawl, looking up at the stars. "Are you okay?" Amanda asked. Margaret turned and smiled, but her voice trembled, just remembering what it feels like, to be small and still needed. Amanda sat beside her in the cold, neither of them speaking for several minutes. Then Margaret turned to her. "I won't be here forever," she said. Amanda's breath caught. "Don't say that." Margaret gently took her hand. "It's not a bad thing. It just means the torch is passing, and I know you're ready." Amanda wanted to argue, to protest, to pretend time wasn't real, but instead, she leaned, her head on her mother's shoulder, and whispered, "Okay." It was all she could say. That night, they returned inside together, arms linked. Neither realized it would be the last time. The next morning, Amanda woke to the sound of the kettle. But Margaret wasn't in the kitchen. Her bed was untouched again. Amanda's heart sank. She searched every room, still no sign. Then she found a note on the office desk, written in her mother's delicate handwriting. "Gone to visit someone at the hospital. Back before dinner." Amanda exhaled, both relieved and irritated. "You're not 20 anymore, Mom," she muttered to herself. But something inside her couldn't shake the sense of unease. Margaret had been more tired lately. She coughed at night. Her appetite had faded, and she never complained. Amanda went about her day, organizing donations and comforting residents, but the clock moved slower. Dinner time arrived. No sign of Margaret. The sun began to set. Volunteers exchanged worried glances. Amanda paced the garden, phone in hand, trying not to panic. Finally, headlights cut across the driveway. A taxi. Dato opened. Margaret stepped out, slowly, carefully. She looked pale. Amanda ran to her. "Where were you?" she asked, almost angry. Margaret simply handed her a folded paper. Lab results. Amanda scanned them. Her knees weakened. "Why? Didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Margaret looked her in the eyes. "Because I wanted one more season." The diagnosis was clear. Stage 4, cancer. Margaret had known for months. She had planned everything quietly. Appointments, medications, even a hospice option. But what she wanted most was to finish Haven Grace, to ensure Amanda was ready to carry it forward. Amanda broke down in tears. "You should have told me. We could have..." Margaret stopped her with a hand on her cheek. "You already gave me everything I needed. You came back." That night, Amanda lay awake, her heart hollow and full all at once. She held Ethan tighter than usual. Outside, the snow began to fall, silent and slow. In the weeks that followed, Margaret's strength faded, but her spirit never dimmed. She still sat in the common room, smiling at residents. She still supervised dinner prep when she could. Amanda never left her side. Ethan often climbed into bed with his grandmother, playing with her fingers, humming softly. "He's calmer around you," Amanda once said. Margaret smiled. He feels safe. That's enough. On a Thursday morning, Margaret asked Amanda to gather everyone after breakfast. She had something to say. Amanda's heart pounded. As the room filled with familiar faces, Margaret stood slowly and faced the people she had lifted. Her voice, though soft, carried through the room. "I built this place not out of charity, but out of understanding," she said, "because I know what it feels like to be invisible, to be needed only when useful. And I never want another soul to feel that way again." The room was silent. Then, slowly, people began to clap. Amanda stood behind her mother, tears running down her face. Ethan clapped too, offbeat but joyful. Margaret turned to Amanda and smiled. "This is yours now," she said. Amanda nodded, trembling. But she was ready. Or at least, she wanted to be. That night, Amanda tucked Ethan into bed, then sat alone in the kitchen. She stared at the manila folder on the table, the same one her mother had handed her weeks before. This time, she opened it. Inside were not just legal documents, but pages of handwritten notes, ideas, recipes, sketches for new programs. At the bottom, one final letter. "Dear Amanda, if you ever doubt yourself, remember this. Haven Grace exists because someone believed in people before they believed in themselves. Now it's your turn. Believe, love, lead." Amanda closed the folder and whispered aloud, "I will." Winter melted into spring. The snow outside Haven Grace gave way to tulips and children's laughter. Amanda planted a new vegetable patch with the residents. Ethan helped water the soil, often humming to himself. Margaret now spent most of her days resting in her room, the curtains pulled back to let the sun touch her face. Amanda visited her every afternoon, sometimes reading aloud, sometimes just sitting quietly. One day, Margaret turned to her and said, "You're not just running this place. You've become its heartbeat." Amanda smiled through tears. "You made the blueprint," she whispered. "I'm just walking your lines." The day came without warning. Margaret didn't wake up. Her face was peaceful, her hands folded over her chest. Amanda found her just after sunrise, sunlight painting golden streaks across the blanket. She didn't cry, not immediately. She just sat at the edge of the bed and held her mother's hand. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of memories, of pain, of healing. It was the kind of silence that speaks volumes. Ethan climbed into the bed beside her and rested his head on Margaret's arm. "Mimi sleeping?" he asked softly. Amanda kissed his forehead. "Yes, baby. But she's not gone." Margaret's funeral was simple, just like she would have wanted. There were no flowers in excess, no dramatic eulogies, but the room was full of children she had fed, elderly women she had sheltered, volunteers she had inspired. Each person carried a different story, but all led back to her. Amanda stood at the front, holding Ethan in one arm and her mother's apron in the other. "My mother left through a quiet door," she said, "but with that door, she opened so many others." There wasn't a dry eye in the room, and no one left without carrying something forward. After the service, Amanda returned to Haven Grace with a new purpose. She didn't try to be Margaret. She didn't need to. She simply carried the torch, with the same quiet strength. She expanded the literacy programs, opened a sensory room for neurodivergent children like Ethan, and started hosting monthly grief circles. The staff grew, donations increased, but what mattered most was that the spirit of the place remained unchanged. People came for food, but stayed for the feeling of being seen. That feeling, Amanda now understood, was her mother's legacy. Not money, not land, but unwavering, quiet love. One evening, Amanda found Ethan sitting in the garden, staring up at the stars. "Do you miss her?" she asked. Ethan nodded slowly, then signed the word for safe. Amanda's throat tightened. He had only recently begun using sign language, and this was the first time he'd used that one. She nodded, crouching beside him. Yes, sweetie, she made us feel safe. That night, Amanda wrote the word on a slip of paper and pinned it beside Margaret's photo on the dining hall wall. Below it, she wrote, "Here, everyone has a place, and safety begins with being remembered." As the months passed, people began calling Haven Grace simply the house. Local schools brought students to volunteer, retired nurses offered medical checkups. Even small business owners pitched in with supplies. The garden bloomed year-round, with little signs showing what Ethan had planted: basil, tomatoes, sunflowers. Amanda kept Margaret's letters in a locked drawer, reading them only when the weight of leadership became too heavy. Each time, they reminded her, this wasn't a burden, it was a gift, a continuation, a calling. What Margaret had built in, silence, Amanda was now amplifying, not with noise, but with presence and purpose. On the anniversary of Margaret's passing, Amanda organized a quiet celebration. No speeches, no performances, just shared meals, shared memories, and handwritten notes placed into a jar called the Gratitude Vessel. People of all ages came. One note read, "I found my mother here." Another, "This place gave me a reason to wake up." At the end of the night, Amanda opened a final letter, one Margaret had written but never given her. If you're reading this, then Haven Grace is still standing. That means love still lives here, and that's all I ever wanted, for love to outlive me. Amanda didn't cry while reading it. She smiled. It was the kind of smile you give when something aches and heals at the same time. She placed the letter into the jar, letting Margaret's voice join the others. Later that night, she stood alone in the garden, Ethan sleeping inside, stars blinking above. She looked up and whispered, "I'm okay now, Mom." The wind picked up, soft and warm, brushing her hair. Whether or not she imagined it didn't matter. Because in that moment, Amanda wasn't just continuing a mission, she was becoming it. Years later, people would ask Amanda how she built such a powerful, peaceful place. She always gave the same answer. It started with 2 suitcases and a closed door. Some stories spread because of loud beginnings. But the story of Haven Grace was different. It grew in silence, in kitchens where lentils were chopped side by side, in letters never sent, in hands held during panic attacks, and in the quiet resilience of a woman who never asked to be remembered but made it impossible to forget her. Margaret had never needed recognition. She had only needed purpose and gave it away freely. Ethan, now older, began helping more. He developed a talent for painting, abstract shapes full of color and emotion. Amanda hung his work on the walls of Haven Grace, beside old black and white photos of Margaret. People began to ask if he'd inherited his grandmother's kindness. Amanda always said the same thing. He didn't inherit it. He grew up inside it. In every brushstroke, in every careful step he took, Ethan carried a part of Margaret forward. She had never met a diagnosis with fear, only with deeper compassion. And now, that compassion was becoming art, meals, programs, and real, measurable change. One spring morning, Amanda opened a letter addressed to the director of Haven Grace. It was from a woman named Joanne, whose daughter had stayed at the shelter after escaping abuse. She found herself there, the letter read. She found a future because someone made her feel like she belonged. Thank you. Amanda read it aloud during their weekly staff circle. Then, folding it carefully, she said, "It's not just about the roof or the meals. It's about what you all carry in your hearts. That's what Margaret taught me. That's what we pass on." The circle held a silent moment. In the hallway, leading to the common room, a new plaque was installed. Not in gold, not flashy, just carved wood like everything Margaret once touched. It read, "The doors that open are stronger than the ones that close." Visitors stopped to read it. Volunteers ran their fingers across the grain, and children asked who wrote it. Amanda always told them, "My mother." Some children nodded solemnly, others smiled and ran off to play. But each one felt its meaning, even if they didn't understand the words. It was a truth etched into the very bones of Haven Grace, a living memory. Eventually, Amanda began mentoring other women, those starting their own shelters, their own kitchens, their own versions of Haven Grace. She traveled to rural towns, gave workshops, shared what she'd learned. That dignity can't be donated, it must be offered. That leadership begins in the quiet moments, and that forgiveness, once accepted, becomes fuel. She never claimed to be an expert, she only shared stories. About lentils, about letters, about Ethan's first word, and Margaret's last smile. Each one carried a ripple, and each ripple reminded the world that silent love doesn't vanish, it roots itself in action. On what would have been Margaret's 80th birthday, Amanda and Ethan planted a tree in the garden. They invited everyone, old, residents, volunteers, neighbors, and strangers. No speeches, just a circle, a shared breath, and a moment of stillness. As the shovel dug into the soil, Amanda said softly, "This is for all that she grew without anyone watching." Ethan placed the seedling gently, patting the earth with both hands. Someone brought out fresh bread. Someone else lit candles. And just like that, a celebration bloomed, one made of grace, of memory, and of the countless lives that had been warmed by her quiet fire. Amanda sat at her desk late that night, flipping through a journal filled with notes, drawings, and bits of advice from the residents. At the very last page, Ethan had scribbled something in uneven handwriting. "Thank you, Mimi. I remember." Amanda placed her hand over the words, closed the book, and felt something settle inside her. It wasn't just closure, it was continuity. Margaret had never needed a legacy carved in stone. She had written hers in people, in warmth, in hands held and silence shared. And now, Amanda understood. The most powerful legacies are the ones that live quietly, every day. So if you ever walk by a modest brick house with a sign that reads, Haven Grace, don't be fooled by its quiet exterior. Step inside. Smell the bread. Hear the laughter. Feel the presence of someone who believed that love, when planted well, outlives everything. And if you see a woman with tired eyes and gentle hands serving soup to a stranger, know this. She carries a flame passed from a woman who once left through a silent door. A woman named Margaret. A woman who opened more doors with her absence than many do with a lifetime of noise.